For the second week in a row, we're here to announce the solving of an old homicide. If you remember last week, we were here to tell you that Shane Knight killed his mother, Jehala Watson, and after 19 years and a lot of hard work by the sheriff's detectives assisted by FDLE, that case was solved. We're here today to tell you about a 16-year-old murder that was solved this week by our homicide detectives. Quite frankly, because after 16 years, one of the two people involved in the homicide was overridden with guilt and confessed. Here's what occurred. Tommy Smith at the time was 37 years old and a well-respected nurse at Lakeland Regional Medical Center. He was with his mother and father, and one of the photographs here are with them at that particular event on October the 10th. They were celebrating a change of job status for Tommy and an expansion, I believe, at Lakeland Regional Medical Center, which Tommy was going to be in charge of. And he disappeared. On October the 11th, early in the morning, his vehicle was discovered along Berkley Road underneath the I-4 overpass. On October the 11th, we also discovered Tommy Smith's body some distance away on Edison Road, which is also north of Auburndale. Tommy was in a 1984 Jeep Wagoneer. The medical examiner's report, after an extensive search of the area, after finding Tommy still in the same exact clothes that he's wearing in this picture, showed that he had been shot twice in the head and once in the neck. He was executed. Over the next 16 years, we interviewed probably close to 100 people. We had some prints from inside of the vehicle, but they were not APHIS quality, so we couldn't run them through the automated APHIS system. We manually ran the prints against at least 25 different people, but no hits and no luck. We had at least 9 different homicide detectives work on this case over the last 16 years. We put thousands and thousands of hours in this case trying to get some leads. We never, ever, ever developed any leads at all, despite all of our interviews and all of our legwork and all of the work, all of the meetings. We know that Tommy's family, in addition to the sheriff's office, worked diligently on this case to try to develop information, to no avail. This last August, sometime around the end of August, 1st of September, Timothy Metters was at a store on Cumbie Road, and he bumped into Timothy Carey. And that's the first time the two had seen each other in years. They spoke, they exchanged pleasantries, and they left. Timothy Metters said from that day forward for about 2 months until August 31st, he was overridden with guilt. It got to the point that he absolutely couldn't sleep at night. Just seeing his colleague, Timothy Carey, caused all that hurtful and hateful night to bubble up inside of him. So he notified the sheriff's office. He says, I've got to get something off of my chest. And we have a lot of people that want to confess to crimes, and once we talk to them, we think, well, you know, it's a nice try, but no good information. But as he started laying out the details of this case, we knew for sure that Timothy Metters was there the night that Tommy Smith died. He gave explicit details that only the murderer or murderers or accomplices or someone there could know. Information that had never been released to anyone by the sheriff's office. Even though we gave a lot of information to the media, even though there were a lot of stories done over the years by the media, for us, the last being in 2005, in order to find suspects, we kept back certain details that only the people there that night would know. Metters confessed. He said he was 16 at the time when he met Carey. They both lived in the area of Highland City. So Metters went over to Carey's house one night, and he saw Timothy Carey loading a .22 caliber rifle. And he said he was wanting to kill somebody that night. And then Carey made a phone call to an unknown person, according to Metters. And Carey said, when the guy gets here, we're going to rob him. Carey said the guy's got money. He's either a physician or a nurse. And a few minutes later, Tommy Smith showed up at the residence. It's obvious that Carey and Tommy Smith had at least a passing knowledge of each other. But I can tell you that we followed up with everybody we could find that would possibly be a friend or an acquaintance of Tommy Smith at the time. And the names Timothy Metters and Timothy Carey never, ever, ever came to surface. No one had ever heard these names or heard of these people until Timothy Metters came forward. Timothy Metters said he concealed a sawed-off .22 caliber rifle in his pants. They got into Tommy Smith's Jeep Wagoneer and left north on Highway 98 from Highland City. They stopped at a convenience store on Cumbie Road. At that time, Metters took the gun and hid it in the car. Once they left there, Timothy Carey directed Tommy Smith to drive to what we know now as Edison Road, north of Auburndale. And when they got there, Carey had Smith and Metters get out of the car. Carey got the rifle, pointed it at Smith, and demanded money. Tommy, in a show of aggravation, took his wallet and threw it into the vehicle. Timothy Carey told Tommy, I want the rest of the money. And he even got the coins out of his pockets and threw them into the car. At that time, at gunpoint, Timothy Carey took Tommy to the front of the vehicle and placed him on his hands and knees. Tommy began to beg for his life. He pled for his life. He stated that he didn't want to die, and he begged Timothy Carey not to kill him. We know that Timothy Carey fired one shot. The gun misfired. Nothing happened. Then he shot 3 more times, twice striking Tommy in the head and once striking him in the neck, and Tommy died immediately. Carey then, according to Metters, pointed the gun at him and said, now you're going to help me drag this body away from here. And they both dragged Tommy into an orange grove and left him. Metters and Carey then got back into Tommy Smith's car and began to flee the area. The vehicle had a flat tire, so they abandoned it where a deputy discovered it early the next morning underneath the overpass on Berkley Road. The deputy ran the tag number. Tommy was not reported missing yet. The car came back clean, not wanted, not stolen. And certainly we found the vehicle there later in the day. Now here's an important part of the investigation, and we hope that the community can go back into their memory banks 16 years later. We don't know why they didn't come forward at the time, except maybe they didn't hear of the information because communications, even through the media, was not as complete then as it is today. Metters and Carey, after abandoning Tommy Smith's vehicle, walked south on Berkley Road and they both were hitchhiking. And they were picked up by a man and a woman and their kids. They took them down to Highway 92 to a convenience store and let them out. From there, Metters and Carey called a taxi cab, which picked them up at the convenience store on Highway 92 in Auburndale and drove them to the convenience store at 98 and Clubhouse near their residence in Highland City. So, if the taxi cab driver is still alive and in the area, or wherever he is, if he sees this communication, we'd like to know if you picked somebody up 16 years ago, a couple of guys from 92 in Auburndale, and took them down to Clubhouse in 98, we'd sure like to talk to you. If the children have grown up, certainly they have, we hope, or if mom and dad are still alive, that fateful night that they gave two guys a ride from Berkley Road down to Highway 92, if that strikes a chord with any of them, certainly we would like to know that as well. On November the 1st, after this confession of the 31st, we took latent prints, or we took a print sample from our suspect, Timothy Carey, and compared it to prints we had from the vehicle that night. And they matched up. Timothy Carey's fingerprints are inside of the victim's vehicle, and we have proven that beyond and to the exclusion of any doubt. So we bring Timothy Carey in last night. We talked to him. He says, I've never seen the guy. I've never seen the vehicle. I've never been in the vehicle. I don't know anything about this at all. Absolute total denial. Doesn't understand what we're talking about. Well, that's very interesting, because that denial is as good as a confession. Because he's never, ever, ever been in that vehicle, and because he's never, ever, ever known this guy, well, it's certainly mighty suspicious that your fingerprints are inside of the vehicle exactly where our witness says you were sitting in the vehicle on that fateful night when the murder took place. I'm sorry that Carrie Smith, who is the mother, and Lester Smith, who are the father, both are deceased, and we were unable to directly deliver the news that maybe would give them at least some peace or some closure that we had arrested the person who murdered their son. In addition to that, we were able to notify Tommy's brother and sister and brother-in-law, and I'll give them the opportunity. They want to make a statement in just a minute. Are there any other questions?
Sure. What will happen to Mr.
Mr.
Metters?
Metters, at this point in the investigation, is considered a witness. We consulted with the state attorney's office, and this is the plan of action that the state attorney's office is most comfortable with, and certainly we worked hand in glove with them during this investigation. But he clearly was there the entire time and provided us the exact details of what occurred that night. But once again, the shooter is who we've charged. And we've charged the shooter, and that's the important one, because he is the one that created the murder. Certainly if he'd have talked and said, well, I wasn't the shooter, Metters was the shooter, you know, that would have created some more conflict for the case. And he didn't confess because, of course, he didn't do that. His defense attorneys will think of that later on.
Sheriff, do you have any idea how much money these suspects may have taken?
Not much money at all.
$10, $20, $100?
No, we don't have any. I don't know specifically, but he did not have a lot of money on him, is my understanding.
Sheriff, do we know why Mr. Smith was meeting with Mr. Carey?
No, they apparently were past acquaintances, is all we know. We don't know how good acquaintances they were, because keep in mind, we talked to everybody that we could find that was friends with Tommy Smith. And we talked to close to 100 people, give or take a few. And none of them ever mentioned these names. So for whatever that acquaintance was, it wasn't something that at least other people knew of.
What was
Any
the friendship
motive?
between Carey and Metters?
Excuse me?
Friendship Metters?
Carey and Metters met each other when they both ended up in Highland City together. In fact, they'd only known each other a week or two. At the time, Metters was 16 and Carey was 19. Yes, sir?
You were saying that Mr. Metters said that when he was talking to Mr. Carey before the crime, that it seemed that Mr. Carey had something either against Mr. Smith or he had some. What was his motivation other than robbery? Was it just? It seemed like he targeted this guy because of the money.
Well, we'd like Mr. Carey to tell us that, because all we're absolutely sure about is robbery was the motive. But we do know he made a phone call, so there was a relationship. He made a phone call to Tommy, and Tommy came to his residence. So how well they knew each other, why they knew each other, what the relationship was, we don't know, and Carey's denying all knowledge of Tommy Smith. But interestingly enough, we talked to Tommy Smith's friends. Tommy was a very gregarious, ultimate professional nurse, and we've talked to everybody who we got any inclination might know Tommy and his associates. And that's the interesting thing. Usually in these investigations, we have talked to the suspects at some point in time. We've developed the relationships during the investigation and talked to them. That's the normal. So we were shocked when we went through 16 years of investigative notes and found zero reference to these two guys.
I see you had a mugshot of Mr. Carey from that time. He had criminal issues in the past?
Yes, he has. He's been to jail.
Sheriff, what?
But he has been to jail.
Sheriff, there's been a lot of cold cases solved across the Bay Area recently. Why do you think so many cold cases have been able to be solved recently?
Well, anytime you don't solve a homicide investigation initially, if you've got great homicide teams that continue to chip on the wall, relationships change and people talk. And this is what occurred here. The relationship, these guys split many years ago, but whenever Metters saw Carey, that reignited that harmful, hateful night. And Metters, who now has grown up, he was a 16-year-old kid at the time, said emotionally, I just couldn't take it any longer. It had gotten to the point I couldn't sleep at night, and he said, I had to get this off of my chest. And that's why we go forward to explain, when someone is the victim of a murder, we take those folks with us every day of our life. That's why we have our detectives work cold cases, and we chip away at these cases year after year after year. We never, ever forget our victims. Never. And it's sometimes a very arduous task to even get witnesses to work with us on some of these cases after so many years, because even the witnesses we may have or the information, they get tired of it. But we never get tired. And that's how we solve them, not just in this organization, but homicide detectives and cold case detectives from around the state have been very successful by continuing to go back. In addition to that, science is better today than it was 15, 20, 25 years ago. You know, I've been in the business, and DNA is not all that old. We could get blood from a scene, and back in the day, we could type it and say, yeah, it's this type or that type. But we can take blood DNA samples from years and years and years ago now, take the DNA typing from it, run it through our FDLE DNA database and get instant hits. So there's a lot of science that allows us to solve cases that we didn't have years ago.
Sheriff, what do you know about these two suspects as youngsters? What were they into? And is there a possibility that Carey and Metters would have met Mr. Smith at the hospital when he had treated Carey or something? Would that have been where they had some relationship or friendship?
This case just came to our attention on the 31st, on Halloween. So as a result, you can see we've only been working on it a couple of days. Those questions will be answered. How was their relationship? Did Tommy Smith treat him at the hospital? Those are cases and events that we'll look at, our detectives, in ensuing days. That's why this media coverage is so important. This may spark memories in someone out there going, oh yeah, now I remember. We need that information. We want our backup information. We want people to come forward to help us finish solidifying this homicide investigation. We've got a great case today. We could go to trial tomorrow, but we'd like even a better case.
Sheriff, you said that the prints that were taken at the time in the vehicle that weren't good enough to run through the national system, but that after you arrested or questioned Mr. Terry, you're now confident that those prints are his. Can you explain technically how that happened?
You know, you have to have a relatively good set of prints for them to be APHIS quality. But sometimes you lift prints and they're not good enough to run through the system. So we say they're not APHIS quality prints. But they are good enough for where a machine or an electronic system can't read them. They are good enough that an expert can read them individually. The downside is then you have to come up with a suspect's name and set of prints to compare them with. And over the last 16 years, we probably compared 20 or 25 different people to this set of prints, and they didn't match. But there's one thing absolute that we know beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt, and that's that Timothy Carey's fingerprints are on the inside of Tommy's car. We have a witness that says that is exactly where Carey was sitting in the car. And we have Carey saying, I don't know those folks. I've never seen that car. I've never been in that car.
So does the case then hinge on the quality of those prints?
No. The prints are solid. We're good to go with those. It's just like anything else that in the modern era of the computer. It's a wonderful tool, but it has to be up to a certain grade or a certain level to work in the system. And those prints weren't there. If they had been, we already had this other guy's prints from previous arrests. We'd have hooked this guy up long ago. Okay?
Hey, in our previous stories, there had been mentioned that Tommy Smith had been threatened, but wasn't really telling anybody. Has there been any mention by Metters of that had been going on?
No. And I think if Tommy Smith had been fearful of Carey, he wouldn't have shown up that night, because Carey made the phone call ultimately to Tommy Smith, and Tommy Smith drove to his house. So certainly if he'd have been afraid of him, he wouldn't have shown up. Let me bring the family up and have them introduce themselves to you. And I believe they would like to make some statements.
I'm Tommy's brother, Ron Smith.
Bonnie McLean, Tommy's sister.
Gary McLean. I'm brother-in-law. Go ahead, Bonnie.
I don't have a lot to say other than the fact that I appreciate everything the Sheriff's Department's done. I know they've spent a lot of money and time on this case. And I feel like I've been waiting a lifetime, but I feel like a great weight's been lifted. And my family would just like to see closure. This guy took a life, and maybe he can replace it with his own in the end, and get what he has coming that he deserves.
Can you all tell us a little bit about Mr. Smith, what he was like, and what you all remember about him, anything special?
Well, he was always my little brother, and he was always pleasant, never had nothing bad to say about nobody. And most everybody I know that knew him and worked with him, all of them loved him, And everybody talked about how good he was at his job, and I didn't get to see him as much as I'd like to, and I wish I could have spent more time with him.
Did you know Mr. Carey, sir? Did you know your
No, I never heard of him.
You want to say a couple things about your brother?
No, I agree with what my brother just said. He was a very professional, a very good friend to have, and he never had a violent side to him, and he was just a very kind person.
What does it mean to have a person that they say did it off the street?
It's a huge relief. It's been a long time coming. Thank you.
You guys wish that your parents were here to see this day?
Yes, we do.
And again, we just like to thank the sheriff's office for their dedication, persistence in this case, and helping us get closure.
We think that our parents have firsthand knowledge of it where they're at, though. Thank you.
Very much.